can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I feel like $100,000.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. And I'm going to introduce today's guest in a second, Dave Ulrich. But before I do, Dave, I always like to mention other episodes that would be interesting based on the guest. And I want to mention there was a interview I did with Nick Aracco of Achieve Next. Check it out. And I was actually talking with Tom Stewart the other day about Dave Ulrich, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then Chris Mersaw, who's CEO of Top Grading, that's also just a really great interview. And he talks about how to hire, retain A-level talent, right? Which relates to today's interview. And before we get to the Dave Ulrich's intro, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. And Rise 25, Dave was kind enough to ask, Jeremy, what do you even do? I said, Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And we do that by helping you run your podcast. And I was telling Dave, and you're in the people business, Dave. Like for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. And I always want to give to my relationships. And I've found no better way over the past 10 years to profile the people, the companies that I just admire, that I think everyone should know about on my podcast. So if you've thought about it, you can go to rise25.com and check out more. And really, Dave, it was inspired by my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, and his brother and him were in concentration camps. But he's got a crazy, amazing story. But his legacy lives on, even though he's not alive, because someone did an interview with him from the Holocaust Foundation. And you've left this amazing. You are still continuing on the legacy, because you have, I think, 10 grandkids, and hopefully their kids and their kids and their kids and their kids will be able to watch your thought leadership, for decades to come and centuries to come. So I'm excited to have Dave Ulrich. And if you don't know Dave, he's been ranked as the #1 management guru by BusinessWeek. He's been profiled by Fast Company as one of the world's top 10 creative people in business, top 5 coach in Forbes. He's been a professor at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, for over 38 years, as my wife and my in-laws would say, go blue, and a partner at RBL Group, a consulting firm focused on helping organizations and leaders deliver value. He's published over 200 articles, over 30 books, and probably, Dave, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, just the most proud is 3 children, 10 grandchildren. So thanks for joining me.
Well, let me thank you. I'm going to do something unusual. Let me just show what I'm most proud of. I have it sitting here on my shelf. That's what I'm most proud of.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Probably doesn't show, but that's my mother.
I can see it.
And kids and marriage and 10 grandkids. We are proud of those grandkids. As I understand, a friend of mine has 2 children, if I remember right, 6 and 9. And that friend is very proud of those children. So
that is,
by the
totally
way, before
true.
we go further, I had a chance to get on your website, and I encourage people to do so and watch the clip of your grandfather. And to be honest, I shouldn't go here to start. I was touched. His legacy that he mentioned you as his oldest grandson, his legacy is one that I think we should all never forget and pass on. So I admire you're doing that. I have people in the background in my office who I admire, and I hope through some of it's not just physical DNA, but it's social and emotional and idea DNA that we pass on. And your grandfather obviously had both physical DNA with you and idea DNA with the life experiences he had. So I hope you recommended Tom Stewart, Achievement, and Top Grading. Let me recommend people go watch even more powerful, the experience of your grandfather.
Thank you, Dave. And I kind of wanted to, as I said, I go wherever you take me with this. And, when I read that, about your bio and did research, like really about leaving the legacy to your kids and grandkids, start there, like the people you admire. Who's in the background there that you want to talk about?
Well, let me, one of the things that happens a year ago, nobody could have predicted. I lived on the road. I traveled, road warrior. You've traveled. We've all traveled. Guess what? I'm at home, and everybody says, "Oh, this is horrible. We're distant." I think technology lets us peek into people's lives. And so this is my office. It's not set up. You see Martin Luther King, who, when I was a young man, there was a story about that. I ended up moving into I won't go a long time for sake of time, but my father was a forest ranger. And that's other pictures of my father, and then a picture of Sheikh Zayed from Abu Dhabi. And he decided to change careers and to go into a social program in the 60s called Job Corps, which was a social program to help young people who were in disadvantaged areas. It's not a new program. And we moved into a small community, I won't say what state or the community, with 200 minorities from the inner city. For 2 years, and you're going to get me emotional twice. For 2 years, nobody would talk to me because I lived on the hill. Dad was in charge, so we lived there. And I listened to Martin Luther King as a 14, 15-year-old. And his ideas really became a part of my mantra, to recognize that his letter from the Birmingham jail, his messages of grace and of goodness just really resonated. And so he's always been an idea mentor to me. And Sheikh Zayed reminds me of whatever background we come from, we can do good. I mean, Sheikh Zayed is not known in the West very much, but he was the founder of the UAE, was given by whatever fluke an enormous amount of wealth with oil in the ground, and he turned it into service. He gave every citizen of Abu Dhabi 2 pieces of land, one for your house and one for your business. And instead of avarice and greed, he gave back. And my dad's picture is the same thing. When my dad retired, and I'm almost done with this story, but it's a glimpse into some of my life.
Go as long as you want, Dave.
He retired at age 55 from social service in the government and decided to do a daily bread run. So every day he'd take his truck, and I have a picture of him in his truck in my house, and he'd go to the grocery stores where we lived in Kansas City, pick up day-old bread and fruit, and give it to homeless shelters and places around the city. So the last 20 years of his life, every time I visited, he'd say, Dave, we're going to do the bread run. And I don't want to do the bread run. But I mean, you had a grandfather who shaped you by example. My father shaped by example, and my mother. And I think that picture of my dad going to a grocery store, that's dad going to Piggy Wiggly or something, and picking up day-old food and taking it to those in need. At his funeral, there were hundreds of people from communities around Kansas City. And we decided to give everybody a coupon to McDonald's in honor of my dad, which was a very bizarre. I mean, by the way, that's not a traditional funeral. So those, I think, are, and then obviously a picture of family and next generation. So I think those life-changing moments of idea icons and people in our lives really shape who we are. And I think I love your idea about relationships. Relationships go across time and place. You don't have to be in the same place. You don't have to be in the same time. I'm assuming the relationship you have with your grandfather, even though I'm sure he's passed some time ago, that relationship is still part of who you are. And I think relationships move. I think 2 things pass over time and place. It's relationships and ideas. And hopefully both of those have been part of who I am. So
yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. And, the lessons learned from your dad, one of, giving back, and you take that throughout your career, in what you do. Is there another lesson you learned from your dad, observing him, or your mom? Yeah.
Well, service and giving back is just my parents' mantra. In fact, when I was 8, 9, 10, I got tired of that. Why don't we just stay home instead of going out to serve? And why do we have all these strange people staying in our house every other night? But I hope we're passing that on to our kids. The other is to answer the question, and I think the most important, I've been asked once in a while to do a commencement speech at universities because they couldn't find anyone else probably. But and it's when I coach, and I have the privilege periodically of coaching. My first coaching question, and the question I raised at the commencement speech is, can I answer the question, what do I want? What do I want? Because I think that question helps us recognize our strengths, our passions, our interests. And in my brief interaction with you, Jeremy, you know what you want. You want to foster relationships that give meaning in people's lives. Now, I put words on your ideas, but
it sounds better when you say it. Yes, you're right.
Well, it means more when you do it.
Yeah.
But I want to keep thinking about what I want. And I value 2 things. One is serving and helping others. And for me, the other value I'm driven by is learning. what can I, there are some people in my field, and you've interviewed them, and don't name anyone here. I don't want to get in trouble. You can tell the time of day by their talk because they give the same talk for 25 years. I mean, oh, it's this joke. Oh, I'm ready for it. It's almost like going to I was going to say a Paul Simon concert, but I date myself. You know what the song's going to do, so you love it. Well, that's not me. I like to have 20 to 30% new material every year, which means my stuff's going to be clunky and rocky and I don't know if it's going to work or not. And I try a joke out and it doesn't work twice. And I say, okay, I won't do that again. But I love to serve and give back, which you get. And I think my parents, my mom at 85 went to China with her sister friend at 85 with no tour guide. And I said, Mom, what are you doing going to China? These two older women. And she said, I want to learn about China. Well, give me a break. Anyway, those are my kind of core two things that I hope organize my world around: giving back, creating value for others, and learning.
Dave, I'm curious, growing up, what did you want to do? And then you went on to get your master's and the PhD in philosophy. What did you want? Did that change? So what did you start off wanting to do? And then when you got further in education, what did you want to do?
Great question. You are such a good interviewer. I knew you would be when I looked you up. But
thank you.
I had always, for some reason, wanted to be a lawyer. So
a lawyer, really? That was the last thing I would think you would say, actually.
Well, me too. But I didn't know any better.
Growing up, you wanted to be a lawyer.
Up. And then I had a course at university called, and somebody got me to take the course as a fluke, called Organizational Behavior, OB, decades ago when it was a new field. The professor just somehow got me. And he said, I'm not going to tell you what to write, what to do, what to think about. And I was an English major because I think writing is a great discipline and I think ideas are powerful, and it was pre-law school. But show me what you've learned about organization. So look at the organization where you worship, where you work, where you live, where you play, your family. Go to a movie, look at the organization and write an essay. So I was studying English. I still remember I was doing a book. We were reading Paradise Lost by Milton. So I wrote an essay about Paradise Lost, chapter 2, the source of power that Beelzebub had. And I'm going to confess here cheating a little bit. I turned it into my English professor and I turned it into my organizational behavior professor. The English professor said, that's weird. I wrote another one, old book, The Ideal Organization Man, William Footwhite, old book. And I said, the ideal organization man in today's world. And I turned it into both. So I sort of cheated. My English professor said, that's really weird. My OB professor said, that's great, do another one. That semester, I wrote, I think 12, 15-page papers every week. And because I have a disease of hypergraphia. I love to write. It's an addiction. And he called me and he said, Dave, I didn't tell you anything was assigned. You've written all these papers. What are you going to do? I want to go to law school. He said, don't waste your time. Come into organizational behavior. So I remember, I'll finish this story. I called my mom and dad and I said, I'm going to change from law school to OB. And at first they said, oh, we're sorry, you're not a lawyer, but you're going to be a doctor.
Delivering babies, exactly.
Yeah, it's not as high a status as chiropractic, but
right,
that was for you. Yeah, but, you're going to be a doctor. And I said, no, it's called organizational behavior. And they said, what is that? And I said, I don't have a clue. But I get to look at organizations and try to figure out how they work. Then I got married. I kept studying organizations. My wife is a very good psychologist, PhD from Michigan, go blue again. We've got to say that 3 times. And she said, Dave, you have OCD. And I said, I don't think so. And she said, Dave, it's called organization compulsive disorder. Okay. Every time you go somewhere, you want to improve the organization. You go to dinner, you call the manager over and say, I can improve your productivity 5%. Let me tell you how you could organize the kitchen and the tables. I've given more advice to airlines. I wrote a note to the CEO of an airline about how they could improve, and he took me off his preferred flyer list.
What was your advice?
A whole bunch of things about staffing and getting on flights, and just a whole host of things about caring about the frequent travelers and managing cost. And I think one of them was, by the way, thank you. I forgot that letter. If you're late 30 minutes, because those of us who fly a lot, being late is a pain because it affects you, double my frequent flyer miles. So I'm a frequent flyer. I get 1,000 miles on the trip. I get 2,000 if you're late. If you're late an hour, triple them. If you're late over 2 hours, quadruple them. And then I'm starting to cheer for somebody to be late. Oh yeah, I'm going to get another 1,000 miles. So, by the way, they didn't do any of that.
I'm surprised he didn't invite you. Like he didn't. Did the person respond or not at all?
He responded, and actually we had some conversations, and then I pushed pretty hard. One of the things I've learned in one of my failures is I sometimes push beyond the other person's willingness to engage. And it's kind of like a chiropractor over-exercising some muscles, maybe. But I've had that failure happen more than once.
We're trying to help,
I am, but I realize helping, remember, my goal is to serve. Value is not defined by me, it's by the receiver. And if I come on too strong and they turn off all my ideas, then I'm not creating any value. So I've tried to learn to moderate my recommendations. I still have OCD, but it's under control most days. If you and I went to a restaurant in Chicago somewhere, I would control myself.
You can't help yourself.
Well, I would control myself and not give too much advice to the manager or owner. Anyway, thank you for letting me relive some of those experiences.
That's really interesting. Because everyone is probably cheering at this point. They're like, Dave, what else do you recommend the airlines do? Was there any other, because that applies to.
Well, let me give an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
That I just feel like we've got to use our resources to help others. I was working with this airline in a city, and it doesn't matter what airline. It happened on a Sunday morning. There was a major snowstorm. Could have been Chicago, could have been Detroit, Milwaukee, it doesn't matter, in the Midwest. And as a result, planes couldn't take off. They couldn't leave the gate, so planes couldn't land, but they did land and they were stuck on the runway. This is a crisis. It doesn't happen often, but it's a major crisis. And the CEO is in another city. Boy, I'm trying not to name the airline because that doesn't help anybody, but the CEO is in another city a couple hours away, is at church on Sunday morning, finds out this happened Saturday night. So 7, 8, 9 a.m., there's people backed up in the airport. It's causing horrible problems. People can't get to the airport as employees because of the snowstorm. The CEO finds out about 1 o'clock and starts issuing orders and saying, do this, do that, do this, do that, to try to take care of people. On Monday morning, I had a call with the CEO and he said, look at how I respond. I said, why the heck didn't you get on an airplane? Why didn't you get on an airplane? Do an emergency call at 1 o'clock and say, at the airport, 1 hour in city B, that was not the affected city A, we're going to fly in. And while we're flying, I want blankets and food. I want the executives of this company to be in that airport sleeping with that came on wrong, taking care of passengers who have to spend the night in the airport. And we're going to give food. And he said, well, that's not my job. And I thought, yeah, that is your job. And you have an airplane, you could do it. And people were stuck on the runway for 6, 10, 12 hours with toilets plugging up because they couldn't get to a gate. I think you've experienced it. You drive a little stair step up and you walk off the gate, get in a bus. And even with a snowstorm, you go to the thing. Yeah, we were told that was risky and the safety hazards and the ice. And I said, when there's a crisis, it's an opportunity to create a new identity. And you missed an opportunity. Sunday at 4 o'clock, you could have been in that airport. You could have spent the night giving out blankets and food. You could have got everybody off the airplanes. I don't know where they would have gone, but those are the kinds of things I want to signal to executives. We have just faced the worst crisis, at least in most of our lifetime, with COVID, coupled with political and social injustice and all these mix of crises. Instead of being threatened by them, why don't we seize the opportunity to create something new? And that's kind of that learning agenda that you asked me to talk about. By the way, soon after that, he said, yeah, those are good ideas. I think I'll go elsewhere for advice.
If I want to stick on that. That's a really powerful thing, which is crisis is an opportunity to create a new identity. And you don't have to name companies or people, but what have you seen right now, with the pandemic and all the social injustice, everything happened? Any examples you've seen of the crisis has created, some companies have risen to the occasion and created a new identity?
Let me just give a couple quick ones. And I bet you've seen them as well. I mean, you've talked to so many people. The first one that comes to mind, and there's a lot of them, hotels and lodging is devastated. I mean, some industries are booming. I wish I'd have bought Amazon and Tesla and Zoom stock a year ago. My studio with my office would look better. But hotels, airlines struggling. MGM, Las Vegas, owns a whole bunch of casinos and lodging. That's what they do. Well, nobody's coming to Las Vegas. I mean, you can't drive for a year, and so they're hard. So what the executive said is, what are the core competencies we've got? What are we good at doing? And lodging is one of them, and gaming is one of them. You know, the other thing we do is we do food. So suddenly MGM starts doing with Uber and others distribution of food all over Las Vegas. So if you want food, our kitchens will now not supply our guests, but they'll supply people in Las Vegas. Call up, order food. We'll do an outsource. We'll do an Uber Eats. I've seen other companies in our business, in podcasts and others, move from doing in-person events. Chris Rainey in HR Leaders is one example. Chris used to manage and organize in-person events. He's now doing events through webinars and podcasts in really creative ways. And so I've just seen a lot of that kind of creativity begin to pop up.
Yeah. You know, I was talking to Tom Stewart the other day, and we were talking about you. And one of the things you did, it really influenced him. And maybe someday if you go on his podcast, you guys can have a separate conversation. But I wanted to bring up, it makes me think of when you're working with executives or students, what do they remember 10, 20, 30 years later? And I'll tell you, I love for you to tell the story about Tom was talking about where you put people's different companies' core values up at the back of the room. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Let me just tell that story. Mostly I got the privilege, and I'm honored to be on the faculty of the Ross Business School. Go Blue. That's the third time we've said it. We have executives come in. So I don't work with degree students for many years. And I often say to them, put up the core values in the back of the room or your leadership competencies, and don't put your name. Can you name that company? And they can't. What we end up doing is generic stuff. I value innovation, collaboration, integrity. Wow, I can't imagine a company that values that. One of the things around that value, I had those two stools, the value and service. Around value is defined by the receiver, not the giver. That's been a premise for decades for me. So the goal of a set of values is to create value in the marketplace. How do your values signal to your customers that you have a differentiation from somebody else? So what I love to do is to say, what would a customer say innovation means to them? How would a customer define collaboration? How would a customer define service? I'll give one quick example. I hesitate to name companies, but the principle is so cool. A company said, let me show you our values. Our number one value, we want to be the most profitable in our industry. Number two, we want innovation. We want collaboration. And I said, let me give you a test. Go to your best customers or your desired customers and say, these are our values. What do you think? Well, you go to a customer. Our number one value is to be the most profitable in the industry. No, that doesn't really work for me. That means you're going to charge obscene price every time you can. And they said, wow, is that the filter for values? Yeah, the value of values is what it creates in the marketplace. So take the other two. What does innovation mean to you? And I love that simple idea of saying, it's not about what we do, it's how what we do will help others. Leadership, I'm going to get in trouble here to make a silly point. Leadership is not about authenticity. Leadership is about creating authenticity in others. Leadership is not about your power, it's empowering others. It's not about building on your strengths. It's using your strengths to strengthen others. And when you take that, I call it outside in approach, that value is your show, your spouse or your friends or your partner, Jeremy, how was your show today? The answer is not what you think, no offense. The answer is, how did my how did my listeners respond? Yeah. Well, for me, that's such a powerful premise. When I give my wife a gift, who defines the value of the gift? Not me. When I was first married, I'd get her tickets to sporting events. Let's go see the Cubs. And her comment would be, well, enjoy yourself. No, the values define, and she does the same. I mean, that picture on the back, I'll show something real quick. You like the personal. That picture on the back in my room, one of the best gifts I've ever gotten. Here's the picture. is my kids made me a book. They made about 10 pictures of my dad. And so this is and so I can now sit down with those grandkids and say, this is your great grandpa Ulrich. Oh, that's him with his truck doing his daily food. That's him. And the picture in the background, I now get, and by the way, that's my dad when he was old and tired. That's me now. What an incredible book.
That's amazing.
Because now I have a picture book of my dad and even some of his drawings. He was a lunatic on some dimensions, but it's so nice. And that was one of the best gifts I've ever had, because I can remember my dad and his slogans and some of the things he did.
That's really cool. The
value of that gift is not that my kids did it. It's what it means to me. So that when I sit down with my grandkids, I get to introduce them to their grandfather.
I love it. I'm curious your favorite authors, books outside of your own, because when I review your work, Dave, and I'm curious too, what are considered the most popular books that you've written? You've written over 30 books. Your work and your philosophies remind me a lot of John Wooden. I don't know if and it's one of my favorite people, authors, leaders of all time. And you just remind me a lot. Your work reminds me a lot of John Wooden's work in that sense. Who are some of your? Well, let's start with your books. Like, what are the most popular books that people enjoy?
I'd rather not go to the books. I'd rather go to the ideas.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the things I feel good about is, well, I should say, you'd say, what's the books I read? I'm looking at my desk. This is the book I read, which is Scripture. I'm willing to say that in a public way without pushing that on anyone. I find values in the legacy in the Old Testament, the Muslim, the Jewish, whatever tradition you come from. There are great stories there that are meaningful. But I love in books to find a few ideas that will translate. And one of the things I feel good about, I've been able to write about leadership. What does it mean to become a more effective leader? And again, the theme is leadership is not what I do. It's how what I do helps others do what they do better. I've been able to write about talent. What do you do to get the best out of your people? I love the work you mentioned earlier, top grading, Brad Smart, who kind of founded some of that. And how do you help people fulfill their potential? My favorite topic in most cases is organizations. How do you rethink and redefine the organization where you live and work, that OCD compulsive? And then the fourth area is human resources. So how do you build the HR agenda in a company to deliver what we call human capability, talent, leadership, and organization? And I hope the ideas are fresh. There are some authors I read, and I've read their first 3 books, and I go, I can read number 4 and 5 right now. I mean, it's almost like watching an episode. I shouldn't confess this. I sometimes watch TV, and I've watched a television show that's popular. If somebody watches this in 10 years, they'll not know it. But NCIS, which is a really fun escape show. And it's always fun to know how many minutes before I know the end of the story, because the plot is always the same. But I still watch it because it's a great escape. But I hope my books in talent, leadership, organization, and HR bring a set of fresh ideas around that creation of value for others and some fresh ways of thinking. That's my hope as I try to keep on writing and pushing.
I want to talk about patterns of ideas. When we were talking before the interview, I said, you've had this amazing breadth, this career. I'd love to talk about some of the organizations you've gone into and helped. And you're like, there's so many. And you're like, there's actually patterns that you see when you're helping organizations. So I'd love for you to talk about a few of the common patterns that you see when helping organizations.
The one pattern that, and again, it's really scary to have a career and have one major idea. By the way, my PhD decades ago was in numerical taxonomy. And if anyone knows what it is, I'll send them a free book. If anyone cares, I'll send them 2. Taxonomy is the science of simplicity. It was in math and statistics. And how do you take complicated phenomena and come up with simple? And that's been my career, is how do you simplify leadership, organization, talent, HR? So one of the patterns I've seen is values defined by the receiver. I said that. We call it outside in. So when you create a company's culture, and everybody's gaga about culture. Peter Drucker was attributed to have said, culture eats strategy for lunch. By the way, we discovered he never said that. And my takeaway is, if you have a great quote, tell the world that Albert Einstein or Peter Drucker said it, because then everybody will repeat it.
Well, I was just going to say when you said the simplicity, I'm like, there is a quote by Albert Einstein about something about everything should be made as simple as possibly, but no simpler. So it reminded me of that.
And he may or may not
if he said that, right? Exactly.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, by the way, if you said Dr. Jeremy White said relationships are the key to your future, that would get a few quotes. But Albert Einstein said, and anyway, so why do I go through that? I love simplicity. And the simple idea that I try to push is outside in. What's the value of what you do for someone else? So in building a culture, everybody says, we want to create a culture. It's our roots, it's our values, it's the roots of the tree. I'm suggesting let's evolve that. Let's learn. Let's go to the next step. Value is not the roots of your tree. It's the leaves and branches. It's how customers perceive your value. So back to the example of that company, what is collaboration? What does innovation mean to the customer? Disney has a great sense. I probably shouldn't start naming companies. Many companies have a great sense of internal values. But the power of those values is when they change customers' behavior. I go spend an enormous amount of money at Disney with my family because I value the magic that Disney creates. That's not an accident. They have created an internal culture tied to an external identity. Their reputation in the marketplace defines their internal culture. We did a book called Leadership Brand, the same issue. A lot of companies have competencies of leaders. That exercise we do at Michigan, where you put on the wall, name that company. Well, that's not very helpful. What is it we want to be known for in the marketplace? Disney, service, Google, innovation, Apple, great service and innovation. Do your internal leaders' behaviors reflect those promises to customers? Talent. We want to be the employer of choice. We've all heard that. People are our most important asset. I would change both. We want to be the employer of choice of employees our customers would choose. If your customer could choose your executives, would they choose you? I asked that in one company, and a senior executive said, how could our customers choose us? They don't know us. And I said, there's an insight. They should. Are people our most important asset? No, our people are our customers' most important asset. How do you filter our people through the lens of a customer? So that's a message I hope, by the way, we keep pushing that over and over again. And it's not easy. That how do you decide the value that's created because of what we do for somebody else?
I love it. And one of the things that struck Tom Stewart, Dave, with that exercise was not only that people couldn't tell which core values were theirs, but you had put up other companies without telling people.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't want to be duplicitous, but yeah, I mean, and you're trying to teach a message. Let me give two other things I've done teaching that may be helpful for those who listen, because it anchors it.
Yeah.
When people come to our programs at Michigan, Go Blue number 4, we say, what are you here for? I want to learn how to change culture. I want to learn how to build executive comp. I want to learn how to build leaders. I want to learn how to, and I always put it on the board and say, why? Put behind what you want to learn 2 words, so that. I want to learn how to change our culture so that our strategy works. Do another so that we win in the marketplace. And until your so that links what you want to get good at to the marketplace, and the marketplace could be a customer, could be an investor, could be a community, you're not going to have sustainable success. I want to build better executive compensation. I want to hire better, top grading. Why? So that our strategy happens. Why? So that we succeed in the marketplace. The second thing I've done in teaching that I really love lately, and it is scary. You would appreciate this, I hope. You're doing it kind of now. Teaching without a net. I go into a class of 20 or 30 executives. The topic is culture, talent, leadership, executive compensation, whatever it is. And instead of giving people a case study, which we love to do, let me teach you a lot about a company you don't know or care about. I say to them, take 5 minutes. What's the biggest problem your company's wrestling with in this topic? Globalization, innovation, collaboration, culture. They write them down. Share them. Let's post them. In the next 3 to 4 hours, you will have a recommendation for you. You're not going to learn about another company. You're going to learn about you. So I've listed the 10 or 20 issues. They fall into 3 or 4 buckets. Good. Let's go to the first bucket. You're struggling with how do we attract the right talent as we go into emerging markets? I don't know a lot about that, but let's spend the next hour on it. What have you tried? What's worked? I call that learning solutions. The goal of learning is to give people a solution to their problem, not your solution. And we co-create. When I've shared that with other faculty, go, are you nuts? I want to know what joke to tell at 10:10. And I go, I don't even know what topic I'm going to be on at 10:10, but I'm going to trust the class executives, and I'm going to trust myself to co-create. That's that passion for learning. Let's create a learning solution. And then at the end of the hour, or the end of the half day or day, go back to your problem. Did you find something that will help you solve your problem? The theory, and I'm sorry, by the way, you've let me talk. Our field is enamored with benchmarking. How do I compare to someone else? Or we're enamored with best practice. We've even said it today. Tell me the company who's best at. I think we got to move beyond that into guidance for your practice. How do I help you solve your problem? How do I give you guidance for what you can do? I think benchmarking is good. I love, I'm pretty heavy. You're not heavy. I love going to Samoa, and I've just labeled a culture. I love going to a country where my heaviness is now average. But that's not helpful. Best practice. Somebody says, here's the diet I did. You should go do it. No, that worked for you. That was terrific. You should do that. How do I find what works for me? And I think that logic of not benchmarking or best practice obsession, and most of the books I've written have been about that. Here's a benchmark. Here's a best practice. I'm now obsessed with guidance. How do I help you solve the issues? I bet you get this. You've been a chiropractor. I've got to ask you a question. Does the same solution work for every patient?
No.
I mean, the best practice for patient 1, 2, and 3 may not be the best practice for 4. And if you're a gifted chiropractor, you recognize, what I did before isn't going to work. And somebody comes in and says, wow, my chiropractor did this adjustment. Would you do it? I hope your wisdom is, let's find out. Is that going to help you? Anyway, I don't think we do that enough in our field. I think we get enamored. Tell me the stories. Tell me the benchmark. Help me figure out what works for me. I call that learning solutions in the teaching.
Yeah, no, I love what you said there, because you trust the process of co-creation and learning by solutions, without a net, right?
And sometimes I don't know. What should we do with compensation in China? Oh, that's a really good idea. And inevitably somebody has an idea. But then if they don't have an idea, by the way, that's where you live. You're an HR head. You just got assigned China and you got a compensation problem. So how are we going to solve that? Sometimes I've said, good, none of us know. Go spend the next 10 minutes in groups on Google. Come back. What have we learned? By the way, I'm trying to teach people the process of solving problems, not just of going to the solution. And sometimes I think that Google solution is really cool. Let's go get a team. Let's go look at compensation in China. I mean, I pick a rather obscene, I could pick any. What's the latest trend in healthcare in blank, blank, blank? I don't know. In healthcare benefits, we have a class of 30. Let's form 5 teams. Go on Google, spend the next 20 minutes. What have you found? Let's come back and co-create a solution. That's what you're going to probably have to do when you're back at home. And now I want to model some of that learning creation process. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, Dave, no, I feel it parallels, how you talk about leadership as well, because if people have people, reporting to them, or people that are leading, and they just try and answer all of their questions, as opposed to co-creation, it's probably the same thing, right?
I have the luxury periodically, Jeremy, of coaching leaders. And they say, what's one of your top 10 tips? One of my tips, ask people the question, what do you think? What do you think? Somebody comes to you with a problem. They probably thought about the problem even more than you. And so they say, oh, I'm really struggling with this. What do you think? What do you think? That doesn't abdicate your ability as a leader to make a choice. But what do you think? Give people the opportunity. Again, values defined by the receiver. The solution is what they're going to come up with. And then what are the options? What's going to work best? And I love what you're saying. I think that value defined by the other and learning are those pillars, if you will, of trying to help us figure out what we can do next.
Yeah. Dave, I have one last question for you. First of all, thank you so much. And
before you ask, I'm going to ask you.
Go ahead.
I hope I model learning. I looked at your website. I was just overwhelmed with the number of people you've talked to, with your stories, your videos, especially your grandfather. I watched that yesterday and got teary, just feeling the experience that is so tragic that he experienced. So
Thank you.
if you were to pick one meta message, and this is not scripted, that you say, when I want people to rise up, when I want people to be inspired, the names of your company, what's a message I'm hearing that cuts across? It's not one episode, it's not one experience. What's a kind of my meta message is creating value for others and learning. Is there a meta message for you that just jumps out of some of those experiences you've had?
From the interviews, you mean?
Yeah, from your interviews or other experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to taking a long-term approach to relationships. I mean, it goes back to relationships, people, not a transactional approach, a long-term approach, whether it's, someone thinking about, I'm going to do business with this person or not, and like, just throw that out the window and just pretend, life is long, but life is short. And so you will meet at another time under other circumstances. And this probably happens in large corporations where someone moves over to another organization. They want to pull their best relationships over with them. And I find just treat it as a long relationship. Don't, and that's for me, when I think of across all the interviews, it's the most valuable thing is mentorship, like finding people who are doing what you want to do and also embody how you want to be. So not just someone who's successful in health or career, but does their life look like something that you want to also embody? Like successful marriage, successful family, like all those things.
I love it. You're known as the most friendly person on it. By the way, I've got a page of notes, just a model. I'm trying to learn. And I've circled in purple relationships. I will think about that. I will put that into my hopper and say, how am I doing on that? And I love the idea of creating those relations. The research on that is powerful. You've seen the Harvard research by folks. The biggest predictor of happiness in our life is the set of relationships we have that we carry. And but you've anchored that with your point of view. Thank you. That was helpful. I hope you and I are forming a relationship. This is our first
100%.
Meeting, and I hope it continues. So I'll let you ask the last question.
Me too. No, I appreciate your question.
I've got my page of notes. So
I appreciate your question. And I don't know if anyone, here's my, I don't know if you could see, this is my, no, it's
we're equally sloppy.
Exactly.
We're equally sloppy.
So my last question before I ask it, I want to point people to rbl.net. Check out more. Check out, if you have listened to this and hopefully it makes me want to buy all of Dave's 30 books, over 30 books. Not that you need it, but just so it helps you and it helps your organization. It helps your people and the people in your world. So I encourage you to check out his books on Audible or Amazon or wherever you can find them, but check out rbl.net as well. Last question.
Or follow me on LinkedIn.
Or LinkedIn.
I've done 30 books. I'm finding that books are sometimes a little dated by the time you write it and publish it. I post every Tuesday a new article on LinkedIn. I looked the other day, my wife said, how many have you done? I looked, I've done 133 articles. I love LinkedIn because I love the dialogue. This morning, I woke up and somebody disagreed with what I posted yesterday. And so we went back and forth, by the way, in the spirit of learning. And I respected the opinion. I didn't have to agree with it, but I learned something. So anyway, LinkedIn is a place you might want to follow. So last question.
LinkedIn. So last question, I think of when we think of some of the most important thing, relationships, family, I'm curious of a big lesson you learned. We talk about your dad, a big lesson you learned from your wife. Like, obviously I didn't realize she was a PhD psychologist. So this would make it even more impactful. What is something that your wife has instilled or taught you? Because I know for me, like the biggest influence on me is my wife, really.
This is the third time I'm getting emotional in this call. I think my wife has embodied the words that we all like to hear: caring, love, empathy, service. I have a wife who not only writes, she's written half a dozen books on the intersection of psychology and spirituality, on forgiveness and love and grace, but she lives those. I mean, she lives those with our children, with our grandchildren, with the pop-ups. You're a chiropractor, you get a pop-up. I need an adjustment. And somebody, you do a pop-up and you throw the table out. She gets pop-ups every week of people who need help emotionally, especially now. This is a very tough emotional time. And she models, I think, what others talk about. And so I think she models some of those values that other people espouse. And then to recognize that she models them mostly with me. Forgiveness, grace, patience. And my wife is a friend. The relationship that I think you must have with those that you're closest to, your wife, your children. My relationship with my wife is kind of the anchor of everything. And we are lucky we take time to talk to each other. She got home late last night from a pretty busy day and some work she was involved with. It's 8:30 at night. We sit and talk for 2 hours. And I thought, I got to get up for an interview in the morning. I got to think about it. No, we're going to talk. And people look at us and say, how do you guys spend so much? Because we can, and we're old. And we live in Utah where it's cold in January. You live in Chicago where it's cold. We take January and go live on the beach in California. Not because of any, and by the way, until this year, we've done it for 10 years. We've never invited our kids because that's our time. No offense. We celebrate Christmas. People have Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever. And we just need a month together. And people say, how does that work? And we say, it's incredible because we still work. I mean, work is wherever you are in this world today, but we talk and talk and talk. And she models the things that she preaches. Somebody once said, we preach the gospel and sometimes use words. And I would put that with my wife.
Amazing. Check out rbl.net. Check out more interviews. Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other